you know us really well, but just in case you're new to the League of Women Voters, we are a nonpartisan group. We advocate for various issues, and we try and look at everything through a diversity, equity, and inclusive lens. We will be recording this session. This is actually going to be the second of a two-part series. We've been looking at the brain science behind our body's reactions to stress and how we can build our resilience skills. In our first session, we looked at a documentary called Resilience, the Biology of Stress and the Science of Hope. We learned about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, and how those can affect the brain development of young children. But on the hopeful side, we also learned what we could do to try and prevent and ameliorate some of that. And in this session, we're going to learn a little bit more about the brain science behind stress, or the physiology of stress, how to monitor our stress levels, and hopefully we'll start learning some strategies to be able to increase our resilience skills. So our presenter is again the mighty Jevanne Skiver. Jevanne, always one of the most positive, smiling, cheerful people I've met. Jevanne is currently the interim director of the New Hanover County Resilience Task Force. She earned her bachelor's degree in communications from UNCW. She's a certified CREM, which is Community Resilience Model, CRM trainer. She's also certified in Reconnect for Resilience as an educator. And she's involved with Be the Bridge, which is an organization that works with racial reconciliation. Jevanne's vision is to create a more compassionate and resilient community here by partnering with community leaders and organizations to provide training in trauma-informed or resilience-focused strategies. And she really enjoys the connections she's making across our community. So we welcome Jevanne. Jevanne, I'm going to hand over to you, and you can let people know if there's anything else you need for them to do. I think we would like everyone muted. So if you could mute yourself at this time, otherwise I believe that Mary Ellen will mute you anyway. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much, Anne. I'm so grateful again to be with you all this morning and to be talking about something that I feel is so very important for our community at large. A wise woman once said to me, "You can't treat the organization without first treating the organism." And I'm not sure that those were her words that she coined. She may have read them out somewhere else, but they are words that continue to come back in the work that I do. So before we get started with learning about the community resiliency model, I just want each one of you to kind of put yourself in a space inside. Think about what's going on inside of you. You bring so much to the table here in League of Women Voters, Lower Cape Fear, but also in other places in the community, I'm sure. And as I mentioned before, if we're not treating the organism, we're not going to affect the organization. So whatever you're involved with, you can only really serve as well as you are inside. Resilience is about that. Resilience is about kind of being your best self, learning about yourself, being more self-aware. And then from that self-awareness, from that wellness that you build, from those practices that you start on you, on the inside first, that is going to trickle out into everything that you do. It's going to affect the people around you. That's what grows a compassionate community. That's exactly what grows a compassionate community. So the model that we use for the task force specifically is the community resiliency model. We use also, as Anne mentioned, I'm certified in Reconnect for Resilience. That's another great model that we use to help teach people skills to be able to manage stress, those stresses of daily life and highly stressful events up to trauma. And this model is written by Elaine Miller Karras from the Trauma Resource Institute in California. Today, as we go through our training, I'm going to have another one of our excellent CRIM trainers in the community, Amy Reed from Coastal Horizons. She'll be joining in at some point in our time together to help teach some skills too. But this model is really a somatic model. It's based on our biology. It's based on our bodies and how we respond to stress. So again, just take that moment. Think about what's been going on inside of you, how you feel right now in this moment. And then once you've kind of thought about all those things, sometimes we come to these learning opportunities, these webinars with maybe not a lot going on. Maybe we feel great, but sometimes we don't always come with our best. We have to show up, but we're not always showing up with our best. So just to check in, I want you to ask yourself this question or these questions, and feel free to put any answers that you feel led to put in the chat to these questions of what or who uplifts you? What or who gives you strength? What or who helps you through hard times? So as we answer those questions, let's see, we have something in the chat. My grandbaby's chuckles. Oh my goodness, yes. I always say I was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years, and I still can, I mean, you don't stop mothering ever. And I definitely get nostalgic for my children's babyhood because they're a teenager and a preteen now. So that the thought of their babyhood really is uplifting, and the thought of having grandbaby chuckles in the future definitely is something that uplifts me. I see faith and church family. Absolutely. Those are uplifting for me as well. Friends, being outdoors, gardening, writing poetry. Awesome. Yeah, these are all things that I'm sure as we all read them, we can all resonate with on some level. Definitely things that are uplifting, that are strengthening, and helps us get through hard times. These things that we are thinking about are really those things we want to return to when times get hard. And this is how we start to build resilience. Resilience is something that we can build a capacity for. We're not necessarily born with resilience in the sense, and we talked about this, heard about it in our last session watching the film Resilience. It's not something that we naturally have a lot of when we're born necessarily. Some people do have tons and other people don't. But what we all have the capacity to do is increase our resilience. We all have resilient capacity. And so Elaine Miller Karras, who wrote this model, the Community Resiliency Model, or CRIM for short, you'll hear us around the community saying CRIM, she defines it this way. Resiliency is an individual's and community's ability to identify and use individual and collective strengths in living fully with compassion in the present moment and to thrive while managing the activities of daily living. What words stand out to you the most from her definition of resiliency? Feel free to put that in the chat if you'd like to share. I know for me, the words compassion and thrive really stand out. Oh, Clarissa said present moment. Yes, absolutely. In the present moment. Definitely. Being able to be present. Collective strength. Awesome. So this definition really kind of drives us back to what I mentioned before, individual and collective. Can't treat the organization without treating the organism. Being able to grow compassion, and that includes growing compassion for ourselves, right? Compassion for self and others. I believe this is really how we thrive. And, you know, I was talking with someone earlier this week. I think often we confuse grit with resilience. Grit is really kind of getting through things, but resilience is that piece that helps us thrive. It's how we bounce back. It's how we swim and not sink, right? Being able to manage the stresses of daily living, the activities of daily living is really crucial. And that's what resilience really is about, thriving in compassion and being present. So generally, our old way of thinking around people having hard times, people maybe not having as much resilience, that conventional knowledge that we once had, is that people are bad. People smoke because they don't have self-control. People are obese because they don't have self-control. People do bad things because they make poor choices. People just don't care. That whole string of thinking really led us to the question, what is wrong with you? When we think of people who have struggled with addiction or people who have struggled with staying out of trouble, the question has always been in the past, what is wrong with you? But with things like the community resiliency model, when people start to learn from movies such as Resilience, like we screened a couple weeks ago, and from trainings like this, what we want to come to is this perspective shift in our culture and in our community to a more trauma-informed perspective. And that trauma-informed perspective allows us to understand that people are suffering. Oftentimes, undesirable behaviors are really people's coping mechanisms. And they're not coping mechanisms that are necessarily intentional or thought out. We find this a lot with addiction. We find this with people who may get involved in unhealthy relationships. We find this also with people who may not have a lot of compassion for others. It's because they've experienced some trauma. And I think it's safe to say in our community, we really want people to understand that most people have experienced trauma. And we'll learn a little bit more about that in a little bit. So the question becomes, what happened to you? Not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. Because again, as we learned in the film Resilience, a lot of the maladaptive coping skills that people adopt is really upstream of consciousness. It's upstream of that thinking brain because it lives in that survival brain. Like when the bear is coming constantly and that fear response, that survival response is constantly activated, the thinking brain isn't engaged as much. So the question is, what happened to you? We need to learn how trauma impacts a child's and adult's development, how trauma impacts us across the lifespan. Once we get to that place, we want to continue on and be resilience focused or resilience informed, knowing that people who experience adversity are not stuck in that place of adversity. Okay, adversity is not destiny. So we begin to understand that people are resilient and they need our compassion as they learn new skills. Anybody can learn how to self-regulate with skills based on science, and especially, I feel, with somatic-based skills that focus on how our bodies are responding to stress. We need to learn these skills to help reduce suffering. So the question then becomes, what is right with you? What are your strengths? That's where we want to put our focus. That's where we want to put our energy, is in helping people find out, and ourselves included, what is right with us. What are those things that we know we can do well to manage the activities of daily living? What are those strengths we have to help us grow compassion for ourselves and for others? This is what we're working towards, this perspective shift. So again, this community resiliency model, it's a set of 6 wellness skills that are based on our biology, how our bodies work in response to stress. For this introduction to the community resiliency model, we're just going to talk about the first 3 skills because they are the foundational pieces of this model. And we may say, why go back to the body? Well, when we understand that these processes are biological, then we can't go to the place of saying that someone is mentally weak. They're not. Our bodies respond to stress. We were designed to survive. So if we're designed to survive, there's got to be something going on to propel us into survival. And that's our stress response. It's our nervous system. We all have common reactions to stress and trauma, and it affects us in mind, body, and spirit. And if we encounter a stressful event, our brain works to protect us so that we won't have to encounter it again, so that we can get away from it. And it overrides that intellectual piece of just trying to talk through it or think it through. We have got to signal safety to our bodies. And CRIM helps us learn how to read our nervous system so that we can do that, so that we can return to a zone of well-being that we call the resilient zone in CRIM. And these skills help us get back to that place. This zone of well-being is that zone where we feel safe. And when our bodies, when our brains, our nervous system feel safe, then we can learn and do all the things that we need to do to stay in that compassionate place, to heal, to learn, to connect with others. And so that's where we want to go with the community resiliency model, and with all of our resilience education that we do in our community, is go back to our biology, right? We all have to deal with stress and our nervous systems. If we're human, we have a nervous system. So that's our commonality that we want to go back to. It's not at all mental weakness when our bodies do exactly what they're designed to do. So, and you may want to put into the chat, these are examples of common reactions to stress. And feel free to add to the chat some common reactions that you may find in the people around you or yourself when you are faced with a highly stressful event, even daily stressors. I know for me, I tend to get a little sad when I'm stressed. Anger is not ever my first stress response, so to speak. I tend to get a little bit sad. So that sadness for me may feel like heaviness in my chest. I may get a headache. I may get tension around tight muscles around my temples and my eyes. And that's a common response. That is not unusual. Would anyone else like to share some common responses to stress, common reactions to stress in the chat? Stomach ache, absolutely. Withdrawal from family and friends, absolutely. Oh, Debbie, that's great. Forgetfulness, guilt, fatigue, and sleep problems right here. Absolutely. That's my list right there. You must be in my head. Anything else? Yes, feeling anxious. Muscle tension, sleep problems. Right. And these are things, again, they are so common. Loss of appetite, yes, withdrawn. These are things that are so common that not one person can't look at this and relate or think, oh, I know somebody who experiences this, right? So these are really important for us to kind of visualize and understand, to get to know that we share this. This is not something that we experience alone. This is something that we all need to be aware of and understand that others are experiencing it too, because it's common. But the most common reaction to stress really, or a highly stressful event or trauma, is really resilience. And after a trauma, we do have resiliency common reactions, right? So I'm going to just give us a moment to kind of check in inside again. And you can think of some times where you've experienced trauma or extreme stress, or even sometimes mild stressors. And think about some of those, and I like to call it post-traumatic growth, some of those things that may have happened in light of what you experienced. And I'll just go on and read this list, and you can be thinking of maybe some things that happened in your own reactions to trauma as well. Resilience, strength and courage, renewed relationships, gratitude, advocate or advocacy, appreciation of loved ones, forgiveness, hope and faith, wisdom, compassion for self and others, and finding new meanings in the things that we experience. These are all common reactions, common resiliency reactions that we experience after a hard time. Debbie mentions in the chat here, after Hurricane Florence, there was a feeling of community and of being needed. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Debbie. I've heard from others throughout our recovery, you know, we're almost 3 years out, I think, from Florence, and still hearing people talking about hope and faith, having gratitude, and that's where I land generally. It's just that deep gratitude that can well up inside. That resilience response is a big deal. Appreciate loved ones, forgiveness. Yes, we do tend to appreciate loved ones even more. And so as we move through these cycles of things that happen and recovering, you know, specifically if we bring up the hurricane, we feel things attached to those stressful events, but we don't have to be stuck there. And I'm sure we can all recall experiences of where we've had those times of discomfort, but we've moved into sensation or a sense of well-being. But what we want to do is transform our experience. So it's not just focused on that common reaction to stress, but also how are we responding with resilience. And there's just a natural flow in that. And we compare it here to the seasons. You know, it's not always going to be burning hot summer or freezing cold winter, right? We look forward to the spring or the fall, those times of relief. And so within the space of understanding how we've talked about our perspective shift, changing from people are bad to what's right with you, what are your strengths? We want to focus there, be resilience informed and resilience focused, because we've learned more about how our brain works in relation to stress, right? We've got this beautiful aspect of our brains called neuroplasticity. And that's just a word for saying our brains are able to rewire themselves. They're able to change through experiences and practices. And the reason that we want to focus on people's strengths and the reason we want to focus on what's right with them is because being able to do that and get down to our biology and all of that really gives us some actual steps to take to rewire our brain so that we are not stuck in adversity. Remember, we said adversity is not destiny. And we're able to move forward with learning skills that can help us get to a place where our survival response is not going to overwhelm us, right? We're not going to get stuck there. We can learn, or our brain can learn new ways to respond. That's building new neural pathways. And something you'll hear a lot from CRIM and other probably somatic-based wellness practices is the brain cells that fire together wire together. So when something happens over and over again, and those brain cells start to fire, it makes a neural pathway that becomes deeper, more deeply embedded. We talked about when we watched the film Resilience a couple weeks ago, like I mentioned earlier, that bear coming and a child maybe feeling that threat over and over and over again when the bear comes home. So that neural pathway for survival is deeply, deeply embedded. But what we want to do is have our brain cells fire in a different direction, focus on the sensations and experiences that are pleasant so that that becomes more deeply rooted, and that maladaptive response where we're overwhelmed with stress, that pathway becomes less and less deep. Okay? Are there any questions so far? Feel free to come off mute if you like. Or if you'd like to put a question in the chat, that's fine too. Okay. We're just going to really quickly talk about tracking our autonomic nervous system. And with our nervous system, you can think of it as a gas pedal and a brake pedal. That gas pedal prepares us for action. The brake pedal prepares us for rest. The gas, or our sympathetic nervous system, is what activates when we have to respond to a threat, when we're faced with a stressful event or a trauma. We know that our heart rate goes up, our pupils dilate so that we can assess the situation, our surroundings to find that threat. Our blood pressure shoots up, we may start sweating, and our stress hormones, the production of those increase. Our digestion and saliva decrease because in that moment, our body doesn't need to think about anything else but getting away from the threat and surviving. And this is a necessary part of our biology, obviously. But if we get stuck there and we're constantly having a stress response, remember we talked about what our brain cells that fire together wire together, and those neural pathways getting so deeply embedded after we're faced with stress response after stress response after stress response. We become hyperactivated all the time. But what we want to do is be able to come back to that parasympathetic place, that place of rest, the break, because that's where our body's breathing rate goes down, our heart rate goes down, the pupils constrict because it no longer has to take in all the light to be able to see where the threat may be. Our blood pressure goes down, and digestion and saliva, they come back up because our body feels safe. It's going to be able to digest food. It's ready to take on that sustenance. It's ready to heal. And so if we're not coming back to a place where we're able to rest, or our bodies can't heal, our brains can't learn, because in those times of action, we can't think about what the threat is. We cannot rationalize. And so our brains very smartly kind of turn that rationale piece of our brain off so that we can respond and survive. But that piece is missing when we don't get rest and we can't learn. We can't connect in relationships until we get back to that place where our bodies feel safe. So that in a nutshell, very, very basically, that's how our nervous system works. It all works for us. We just have to be able to get to that place of rest. There's a balance there, right? A little bit of brake, a little bit of gas. That's where we want to get to a place to be. We don't want to be activated all the time because it will cause us to to be hurt in ourselves, and it'll be maladaptive. And so just a few facts about CRIM is it can be used across the lifespan. It's for anybody of any age. And sometimes we can get really focused, which we should be, on trauma and ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. But sometimes we forget that grown-ups are just old kids, right? So the experiences of adversity in childhood don't just disappear in adulthood. So we want to be able to teach skills that can be used across the lifespan, and that's what CRIM does. CRIM can be used across cultures because it is based on our bodies and nervous systems. We all have a nervous system no matter where we're from. So culturally, it can be adapted and sensitive to anybody that's using it. And it has nothing to do with literacy because these skills can be shared verbally. You don't have to have a workbook and sit through a training, which you'll learn in just a minute, to access the skills and to hear about them and know about them. We just have to be able to build a common language with each other, right? Absolutely. So one thing, I do notice a question in the chat. I'm going to pause for a minute and address it. It says, some people respond to stress while sleeping. Wake up in stress. Can that be relearned? Yes, when we signal safety to our body, we will definitely natural human response in our bodies is to be able to sleep. But if our bodies are still activated, we can respond to stress in our sleep. But what we want to do with the community resiliency model and the skills we learn is to get to a place which we'll call the resilience zone, where that stress response, we are able to manage it. right? We're able to learn more skills, build more resilience so that that stress response is not maladaptive. And so we're not waking up with that stress at night for the most part. Thank you for asking that. So again, as the community resiliency model across the lifespan, any culture, any learning ability, we can teach these skills. And I think my trainer, my co-trainer, Amy Reed, is on the call now. Amy, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Would you mind teaching about the Resilience Zone?
No, I would love to.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. It's great to join you here for a little bit today. And so, yes, I'll take us right into the first concept, kind of key concept of the community resiliency model, and that is the resilience zone. And so the resilience zone is that place for each of us. We all have a resilience zone. And it's that place for us where we're doing okay, where we're able to handle what's going on, whatever life's throwing at us, so to speak, but we're still able to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves and manage daily life. Did you? I'm going to guess that Javane shared the definition of resiliency that we kind of use as our to have us all on the same page that Elaine Miller Karras gives us. And the last line of that definition of resiliency talks about managing and thriving while in dealing with daily life. I don't have it exactly memorized as I probably should, but so the resilience zone is that place where we are managing daily life. We're okay. And you see that red line that came into the zone with the arrows, and that just kind of represents that in our resilient zone, we're not living life in a vacuum, right? So we can experience lots of different emotions and be in our resilient zone. We can have high energy or lower energy, but still be in our resilient zone. And at the top of that slide, it also says in quotes, the okay zone. Some folks call it the okay zone. Excuse me. Sorry, I had a tickle in my throat. Some people call the resilient zone, sorry, the relationship zone. Because when we're in our zone, I do apologize. Let me take a sip of something. When we're in our zone, that's when we can engage in positive, healthy relationships. And as I said a minute ago, that wavy line indicating that we can experience lots of different emotions and still be in our zone. So I can be, I know this is so annoying to you all.
Oh, do you need me to take over, Amy?
Just for 1 second.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Amy was mentioning, we're able to experience a wide range of emotions and still be okay, right? Okay, that okay space is definitely not our happy place. It's not our comfort zone. We can feel calm and we can feel happy, of course, but we may also be tired. We may also be angry. We may also be scared, right? So, this is that space of managing the daily activities of life where we experience the full range of emotions of life, but we do not feel overwhelmed, right? We don't feel like we cannot handle what may come next. And in that space of, we call it charge and release, where we may get a little bit high and then we may fall down and get a little bit low, but we still are okay. But in that moment, there might have been anything in a day or throughout your week where you might experience a jolt, something that kind of breaks that equilibrium, that place of balance, and punches you out, or we say bumped out, bumps you out of that place where you feel like you can manage, where you feel like you can be okay. Amy, did you want to pick back up now?
Yeah, I can jump back in. I think I'm over my throat tickle. Thank you, Colin.
I know, right?
Yeah. So yeah, just as Javane was saying, we're in our zone, and then you see that red, like kind of lightning bolt. I like to call it the jolt. So we're carrying on, going through life, and then we get a jolt. Something happens, and then our zone starts to look a little bit like that. Can anybody relate to that line that's like going all over the place? Kind of getting bumped out of your zone, just to start to bring in some crim language to this conversation. Javen, I'll let you read that chat while I keep talking, please. So we get this jolt in life, and we start bouncing all over the place. And that's normal. That's going to happen. There's so many things that are out of our control, right? So jolts will happen. Expect them. The thing is, you can learn skills to bring you back into that line. Might start going crazy. You're all over the place, bumping up high and bumping down low out of your zone. But skills can actually bring you back into your zone, because here's the thing. It's normal and expected and gonna happen that we're all gonna get bumped out of our zones at some times. That's okay. What we don't want to happen is that we get stuck out of our zone. And so when we get stuck out of our zone, like if we get bumped up high out of our zone and we get stuck high, that can look like having angry outbursts, feeling really edgy, being irritable, maybe kind of manic feeling or manic behaviors, anxiety, panic attacks, and just being kind of wound up really tight. And I don't know about you, but I've certainly been bumped up and gotten stuck up high. And it's not really a comfortable place for me or anybody else around me for me to be. And so we want to learn skills that we can bring ourselves back into our zone. The other thing that can happen is we can also get bumped down low out of our zone. And when we get bumped down low, that looks like depression, sadness, isolating, that really overwhelming tiredness of just feeling exhausted and fatigued. You can actually feel kind of numb, like your fingers, hands might feel kind of numb if you're bumped and stuck down low. And I always know when I'm getting stuck in my low zone is when I don't answer phone calls. I just let it go to voicemail and say, I'll listen to that later. I avoid friends. Starting to happen a little more now. For a while, we weren't going out and doing anything, but friends wanted to get together and meet somewhere at a restaurant that, I'm not sure I can go. Like turning down social invitations, those are signals to me that I'm low. And sometimes it might be I'm just taking care of myself and I want to stay home and rest. But I know I'm stuck when it starts to really impair my relationships with people. Like I was saying before, the resilience zone can be called the relationship zone because that's where we have positive, healthy relationships. Well, if I'm avoiding all my friends or my siblings or my spouse, if I'm isolating, then that's not a positive, healthy relationship. So that's kind of the key to know. Am I just bumped out a little bit or am I stuck? And so you can go to the next slide. When we think about the resilience zone, just a couple of things to be aware of with our resilience zone is some people naturally have a more narrow zone. And those are people who you can see if it's narrow, there's not a lot of room for that charge and release, like Jay was calling it. There's not a lot of room to experience different emotions without getting bumped out. And you may, as I talk about this, you may think of people, you may know someone where you say, it just doesn't take much and they fly off the handle. Sure doesn't take much to get them upset, things like that. Those are indications that person or ourselves have a more narrow zone. And then we could have a really, really wide zone where there's all kinds of room to move around in there. And that might be somebody that you think of, or again, of yourself, that, gosh, it just doesn't matter what happens. Javonne always just bounces right back. Nothing seems to bother her. Nothing seems to ruffle her feathers. Those kind of folks, that's an indication that there's a really wide zone. There's a lot of room to move around. And one thing we know is if we use these wellness skills that Krim teaches, we can actually widen our zone. We kind of relearn how we're responding to things and how our body is. We learn to read our body so that we can then stay in our zone a lot more often. We can handle more feather ruffling, so to speak, without getting bumped out of our zone. And that can even change throughout the day. Sometimes depends on what's going on. Again, like I said, there's so much that's out of our control. Things may be happening and my zone might be narrowing as the day goes on. And then if I practice skills, I can get it to widen back out there. Any questions about the zone? Is that making sense, what our zone is?
And feel free to start using this language, as Amy and I do our work in the community, one of the first things we talk about is creating a common language, and Krim helps us do that. So now you all have a piece of that you can use with each other. I am bumped out, sister. I'm bumped high, I'm feeling anxious, or I'm bumped low, I'm feeling sad or fatigued or numb. But one thing I do want to get to that was in the chat, Sherry O'Donnell shared something. I'm going to read what she wrote. I think it's very important. When to put yourself before the desire to make a difference, being an activist. The desire to make a difference sometimes overshadows our own needs. Activists have committed attempted suicide because the stress to do good became too overwhelming. Is it time to retreat from the activism for a period and re-enter? Absolutely. Anytime you feel that you are outside of your zone, and we'll start using that language right now, and anytime you feel like you can't manage the activities of daily life, it's time to step back and take care of yourself. The skills that you learn with the community resiliency model are active ways that you can step back and take care of yourself. Okay. And Amy's going to jump in too, but at any time that you feel you need any help or any resources, you can email me and I can direct you to some, and you can certainly email Amy. Amy, what did you have to share?
I was just going to say that, yeah, one of the things you will learn, like the first skill of Krim is a skill called tracking. Mm-hmm. And it's all about learning to read your nervous system so that you can tell, am I bumped out? Because sometimes we're so used to just pushing through.
Yes.
Like that we're not good trackers until we learn it, because we're not great at reading what's going on with our body because we push through.
And I'm sorry, Amy, but I spoke to that a little bit earlier. Remember, we talked about the difference between grit and resilience. Mm-hmm. Grit helps us push through to the point where we can hurt ourselves. Mm-hmm. Resilience is being able to identify when we're not okay, taking some self-care, and then bouncing back. Does that make sense? Grit doesn't give us the discernment to know that we need to stop or take a pause. Resilience does. That's why it's self-care.
Exactly. And sorry I missed that part of the conversation. It sounds like it was probably
No.
really good. But yeah, the thing is, like, when we look at that image of the zone and the wavy line with those arrows that charge and release, that sometimes as I head up on my zone and I'm going like I'm gonna bump out, if I get up to the very top of my zone, sometimes that's really good because it's giving me the energy and the power and the oomph I need to address the issue. So if, taking from this comment in the chat, if I am working on as an activist on a particular issue, that charge really helps me do what I need to do. But what we learn with the skill of tracking is to notice when we've crossed the line, so to speak, really, out of our zone. And at that point, we're not managing. And it went too far to be healthy for ourselves. I don't know if that makes sense. That's, in my brain, that makes sense.
It made sense to me. And then we also have in the chat, what about the person whose coping skills are excellent, but also disguise the toll that behavior takes on the behavior takes on the individual? And, you know, I would say coping skills versus self-care skills, again, knowing when I'm not going to disguise things anymore, right? And that's just kind of like a personal, like going in that personal, putting your mask on first, we like to say in CRIM, is making sure that I have the tools to not just be able to get through, but to actually say, okay, I need a minute, and then model that for others. Like the community resiliency model is based in being able for it to be able to be shared. It's accessible and adaptable. So if I am using the skills and sharing them with other people, remember we talked about like building that culture of compassion. You know, this is just me sharing. I just feel like you'll have that opportunity to not feel the need to disguise because you want to be able to utilize the skills and model them for the people you may think you have to hide that burnout from, possibly. But not, again, this is just, you know, that part was just me kind of thinking that through. But I really hope that, you know, when we talk about tracking, learning how our bodies are responding, that before we get to that point, and again, it's a practice, we're really paying attention to what's going on inside so that we're more aware of those times when we may feel the need, or we're ready for those times when we may feel the need to disguise, instead of saying, I'm bumped out of my zone. I am going into this manic place. So I'm going to take a step back. If you're feeling that way, I would invite you to do so as well, and not feeling like, oh, I'm this person who's the activist, or oh, I'm this person who's the leader. We have to push through. We have to be resilient. You know, we have to be able to show up for the work. We can't show up for the work if we're disguising and being bumped out. Other questions we have here: what can you do when others' self-care puts more stress on you, more responsibility to get a project finished, right? For some who know when to pull back on activism for self, how can the frequent
guilt, maybe, I think
guilt that ensues be handled? So again, going back to the model, these skills will help you think through and feel through some of these examples of issues that you may run into. Does that make sense? This is not necessarily prescriptive what to do next in this situation, but it is definitely proactive. And I know how my body is responding to stress. I'm growing self-compassion. I can understand how someone else is responding to stress. And using this model, you can really build structures in your home, for you personally, and within your organization that help you better manage those times when you have to encounter picking up somebody else's weight, right? Or being able to transfer more weight to other people. This is about building the reservoir, which is all of our resilient zones. Remember, we talked about our collective strength. These skills help us do that and gives us language in a way and a way to do it so that we're not necessarily responding specifically to specific scenarios. We've already put the practices in place so that when those scenarios arise, we're ready. Does that make sense? These are all great questions.
They are. And a couple of things I'm thinking too is reading these questions, and I don't know what the time is like. Do I need to?
Well, we have about 25 more minutes. So.
But do we need to get through another section?
Yeah.
As you're moving toward, I will just say you can keep like set up for the next slide. But one thing I do want to say is about like the skills of CRIM. They are quick and fast, and so I can be working on self-care, filling myself up, resetting myself as I'm sitting here right now. Like I'm working now, but I'm grounding as we're doing this. And when that's resetting my nervous system. So one of the, just kind of the idea of self-care, honestly, I think that term, I think I'd love to kind of throw it out the window right now, actually, because it's become, and I'm kind of reading between the lines. For some, it has become an excuse to not be held accountable because I had to take care of myself. I had to go do some retail therapy and take the afternoon off work and go to Costco. Or I'm kind of being tongue in cheek here, but self-care is more about that perspective shift, and it's shifting everything. So I practice self-care from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed. It's not about taking a bubble bath at night. Taking a bubble bath is nice. And yeah, when I can, I do. But self-care is using these skills all day long, monitoring my nervous system and taking care of that. So shifting how we look at ourselves.
Right. And, as I mentioned before, like how we are using it, putting our own mask on first and being able to model that for the people around us. So after we learn about the skills, like you're not a CRIM teacher, you're not certified in the model, but you're able to use them and share them. And that's what a CRIM guide is, a community resiliency model guide. That's just somebody who knows the skills of the community resiliency model and shares them with others. And, as Amy mentioned before, we don't want to reduce self-care to, stepping away and irresponsibly, right? It's very intentional. It is about putting our own mask on first and understanding our bodies and that whole perspective shift to what's wrong with me, why can't I perform, to what's right with me, what are my strengths, what am I doing to help me operate optimally in mind, body, and spirit. And so the basic 3 skills that I mentioned before, tracking, resourcing, and grounding, are the foundation of CRIM. Tracking specifically is the foundation. So again, I think a question was asked in the chat, is humor one of the skills? It could be. And we'll learn in just a minute how you can use humor within the skills of CRIM. Again, these are really accessible. So it's not prescriptive, it's not exhaustive, but it's definitely something that you can use as a framework to build your practices on, okay? So I'll take tracking, and then Amy, if you don't mind coming in with resourcing. So tracking is reading sensations in our body. Remember, we talked about being able to know about our autonomic nervous system when we're getting activated or when we're ready for rest. And as tracking is the foundation of CREM, it's about noticing and paying attention to sensations in our body, specifically sensations of well-being, because that's what we use to rewire, right? We talked about rewiring our brains, that neuroplasticity. So with CREM, we want to track those sensations that are pleasant or even sensations that are neutral, so that we can build that resilience. We build that sense, that felt sense of wellness or well-being, and it keeps us in the present moment. You know, we're not worrying about what already happened or worried about the future. We're present. And for tracking to really be effective, we just have to pay attention to those sensations of well-being. So that is what grows. What we pay attention to grows. And that's the best thing that we can learn. It's hope, really, that we don't have to get stuck in that rut of our negativity bias, of feeling that stress and going to a dark place and not being able to manage the activities of daily life. We want to be able to acknowledge those positive, or not positive, but those pleasant and neutral sensations that can help us be able to manage life more effectively. And what we do want to pay attention to is knowing that sensation is the language of the body, right? So that intellectual piece, remember that I said that only really comes on when we're in that parasympathetic place, or when we are in our thinking brain, doesn't really work all the time when we're activated. Doesn't really work at all when we're activated, because our thinking brain needs to shut off so we can survive and do the next best thing to survive. So sensation being the language of the body, we have to learn what those sensations mean, how they feel, what we're feeling, because every emotion has a corresponding physical sensation. So if I look at this picture, and it's kind of just a mapping of where certain sensations land in the body based on that emotion. I can look at anger and I can look at love, and I see that both of them are warm. That yellow and orange represents warmth in the same places. So if I need to track those positive sensations, I need to be able to, or those pleasant sensations, we don't call them positive or negative, they're just what they are, but the pleasant sensations, if I want to be able to track those or pay attention to those or discern those, I need to know how that feels inside. So warmth in my chest with anger is probably unpleasant, but warmth in my chest with love is probably very pleasant, right? And I want to be able to discern that. So all of our thoughts, our feelings, our life experiences will have a corresponding sensation that we want to be able to pay attention to. And when we learn to discern between the pleasant and the unpleasant, then we're able to have a choice of what we want, of what we pay attention to. So again, it goes back to paying attention to what's going on in the body, and then sitting with the pleasant or neutral sensation. So right now, I just want you to take a second and think about what's going on inside. Maybe you're remembering a feeling that you had earlier today where something made you laugh, that humor piece. Or maybe right now you're recalling something that made you laugh. Or maybe right now you're experiencing curiosity as to what we're going to learn next. What does that feel like inside? Are the sensations pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? If you sense something pleasant, sit there and stay with that sensation. And that's what tracking is, being able to sense, pay attention to those sensations, and taking the time to actually find them. That's something we have a lot of language around emotions, which is great, but we also have to develop sensations around those emotions, figure out what we're actually feeling in the body, because that's what's informing our brain on whether we're safe or whether we're not safe. Are there any questions about that? So giving ourselves some more language around sensation. When I teach about this model, or when I teach about resilience or trauma at all, in the hope of being able to rewire our brains, I get excited. So generally, I have a tightness in my throat, but it's pleasant because it's an excitement kind of tightness in my throat. I may experience warmth in my chest because I am excited about teaching or presenting. I may also have some tightness in my neck because I might be a little tense from teaching, but in the moment, I can sense that that's pleasant for me specifically. So like words like warmth or tightness, paying attention to your breathing. Try using more sensation words over the next week to help you become more aware. And we do have to give this caveat that some people, even when trying to sense pleasant or neutral sensations, it may spark something unpleasant. And as I said before, CRIM is not prescriptive. It's invitational. So if there's something that you're experiencing when you're trying to track, stop. There's no need to continue. It's your choice, right? Don't force it. Only do what helps us build resilience, and that's paying attention to what's pleasant or neutral, okay? It's not about avoidance. It's really about paying attention, being intentional. Any questions around that? All right, Amy, you can take it away for resourcing.
All right, thank you. So the next skill is resourcing. And actually the best way to learn how to track is to combine it with another skill. And I do apologize, I had to step away quickly. Somebody was at the door. So if I repeat something that Javanae said about tracking, I apologize. But in CRIM, we are always tracking. Like it's that key, it's what holds it all together. So when we learn a new skill, every time we practice another skill, we go back to tracking because we're always paying attention and noticing those sensations. So we're going to combine it now with resourcing. And I just invite you to look at this picture that's on the screen, and just, you can either unmute and say it or put it in the chat. What do you see in this picture that might be pleasant for the people that are in the picture and the dog even? What might be some sensations maybe that they're experiencing that are pleasant? We're going to track for these people that are in the picture. Like, one, I would say, just to get us started, to give you an example of what we're looking for here, is I think something that might be pleasant is the warmth from those mugs. I envision that that's probably coffee or hot tea, something warm in those mugs. So I just think it's probably pleasant that they feel that warmth from the mug in their hand. Yep, I see warmth in the chat, a snuggly dog, yep. Unconditional love from the dog. Mm-hmm. Being together. Yep. They look happy. Yep. Shared humor. Yep. They're smiling. Looks like they were laughing or something was funny. It seems like. Relaxed laughter. Mm-hmm. I feel like that scarf she has on, to me, it looks so soft. Like I just want to rub that on me. Like, connection, bodies, dog connecting, trust. Yes, absolutely. These all seem like things that might be pleasant. Somebody else could look at that and say, oh, that scarf looks scratchy and itchy. I would never put that on. You know, it's just individual perception. So a resource is any person, place, thing, memory, personal characteristic, song, scripture, quote, anything or person that helps you feel calm, pleasant, peaceful, maybe helps you feel strong or resilient. A resource can be something that is real, or it can be something that is imagined. One of my resources is, it got moved, but it's usually right by my keyboard. One of my resources is a little stone that I have that reminds me of my sister. It's a real thing. It's right here. I keep it by my workspace, but it could be something that's imagined. Like I've never been to Aruba, but I imagine my trip to Aruba all the time. Sometimes I just, stop and think about that, and it just calms me down. For children, imagined resources can be really, really important. Could be a stuffed animal. It could be a cartoon character, a television character, a book character. Those can all be resources. They can be internal or external. So they can be things that are out there, like my stone, that's an external one. Or it can be internal, like the wonderful example that Nancy gave in the chat, humor. My sense of humor may be something that is a resource for me. It helps me calm down. If I can find humor in something or laugh about something or use my sense of humor. Now for other people, my sense of humor might not be a resource. It might be very annoying. Ask my husband. So it can be something that is an internal personal characteristic. My sense of gratitude might be something that when I stop and think about my ability to feel gratitude about things in my life, that characteristic is a resource for me. I was sharing in a training the other day, Javina, you might have been in that one, I can't remember, but I was saying that a resource for me that I just recently realized was my daughters, I have a almost 20-year-old and a 26-year-old daughter. And they're at that point in their lives where now I start to see them do things and I'm realizing their character. I'm realizing the women they're becoming. And that is a resource for me. Like it really, when I talk about it, I get tears in my eyes. I am so pleased with just values that I see them in incorporating into their life. And so those are all internal, but it is such a resource for me. I feel so good when I think about that. So like just talking about it, I took a deep breath and my shoulders dropped down and relaxed because it's intense. This next slide that Javine has put up, what we want to do with our resources is have them be very intense for us. We want to really detail them out. Like the picture on the slide is like an easel and painting. So if we think of our resource, it's almost like we want to paint a picture about that resource and we want to fill that whole canvas with all the details. Because the more detailed our resource is for us, the more of that felt sense we get from it. So what I mean is the stronger that resource is for us, even if that resource is not here, if I just bring it to mind, it does the trick for me. Like my daughters are not here right now, but just talking about them and thinking about them, I can hear the conversation where my daughter was saying something that really gave me an example of her value system. And she was saying it to her friends. I can see the friends. They were sitting by the fire pit. I can smell that fire from the fire pit. Like that whole scene is in my mind. And when I think about it, even without being here now, I get that deep breath and that calm. I'm resetting my nervous system. When honestly, it was my first meeting ran late. I was afraid I was going to be late to this. Then there were some men doing some work outside. They wanted to be paid. They knocked on the door right as I was coming up to this section. And I was kind of like, I could feel it. But just now, if I taken that minute, I picked up my rock and I held my rock and I feel it. And then I talk about my daughter and I reset. This is self-care. I'm resetting my nervous system as I'm talking to you. And I'm doing all these things without having to step away and say, and, I didn't have to text Javanae and say, sorry, I'm not showing up today. You have to do the work for me. So I hope that example makes sense, because I'm kind of seeing it play out in real time here today. Does anybody have any questions about that? Javanae, would you add anything?
Yeah, it's just, I think you just hit the nail on the head when you talked about painting the picture. And I think we underestimate how, and actually we just don't have the skills to know, or the know-how really, of being able to take those moments that we can consider resources, or those things that we consider resources, and allowing ourselves to enjoy them. Like the idea of just taking that stone and holding it and rubbing it. We may do it, kind of subconsciously, like not paying attention, but our body's wisdom is saying, rub the stone, and it goes back to that sensation. Like it feels like something that signals safety. So we do it, but being able to intensify that and be intentional with it is really, like you hit the nail on the head. It is self-care, and it is creating that space in our nervous system to help us make our resilient zone that much deeper, just by actually intentionally paying attention to the sensation around those resources. If it's something that is external or internal, or an idea, being able to take the time to allow the sensations to be felt, that felt sense, to allow for that to occur. I was in a group therapeutic session recently where we had to draw a picture of a place where we had never been hurt. And the place that I went to was a place where I had physically been hurt. I'd gotten a splinter as a child, but I drew my backyard. And the therapist was saying, pay attention, or what do you smell? What do you see? What do you feel? I felt that splinter, but it didn't make me feel unsafe. It's a fond childhood memory of making a poor choice as a child, playing with a saw and rubbing sawdust away and getting a splinter. And the smell of the air, the Carolina pines, like all of that, like having that happen really brought me a sense of well-being that lasted for days. I would go back to that. So that was signaling safety to my brain. And, some resources can have different natures. I know I could have thought about that splinter as being unsafe, but it wasn't. But there may be a time that we would recall, or something that we would call as a resource, where it may bring us to tears, remembering a loved one that we've lost. But we just, in those moments, acknowledge that a resource can go from being one thing into another, and that's not uncommon. And just invite our awareness to the more pleasant part. Like, even though I had that splinter in my hand as a child, the pleasant part of that was I was in the safety of my backyard, looking at the pine trees, feeling the sun on my skin, smelling the pine in the air, knowing that my home was my safe place, regardless of the splinter. I paid attention to those sensations that came up. And again, this isn't prescriptive. If it's too hard, choose a different resource. Don't try to make a resource work. Go to what works for you. Are there any more questions around that? Any comments? Okay, well, we have, oh, Blair, were you going to share? Okay, well, we have about 5 more minutes, and we'll go into our last skill we're going to go over today, and that's grounding. And, you know, all of the skills really kind of play off of each other. They all go back to tracking. So in grounding, what we're essentially doing is signaling, again, signaling safety to our brains. And grounding has to do with that direct contact of our body to something that provides support in the present moment. It's kind of about that gravitational security, our proximity, our position in relation to the ground, that really allows us to signal safety to our brains. So when we ground, we have a felt sense of security and a felt sense of being in the present time and space. We're actually able to touch something real around us. And that gives us a sense of peace, or at least gets us to a sense of peace or calm. And we're not worried about the past, and we're not worried about the future. We're right here in the present moment. And there are many different ways to ground. As Amy mentioned, like sitting at her desk, touching her desk, or sitting in her chair, she's grounding. I'm doing the same. I'm paying attention to my foot on the floor, feeling the rug under my toes, paying attention to the back of my chair, feeling that support on my back. You can ground by sitting down in a chair, sitting on the floor, standing against a wall, walking and paying attention to your steps. Too often we forget about that being a grounding exercise, but feeling the solid ground under your footfalls. That's a way to ground too. Being able to push on a wall, that can be a way to ground. We do have another caveat though. Some people, children and adults, may experience physical discomfort or distress, remembering a trauma when they press against a wall or lie down, or any number of ways of grounding. So grounding can, in some folks, increase that sense of those sensations connected to a traumatic memory. And when that happens, we stop and we use another skill. So if grounding isn't comfortable for you, try resourcing. And there are other skills in this model that we won't go into today that are, available to you. But going back to those, essentially tracking where you feel pleasant or neutral in your body is where you want to go back to. So maybe you can't lie down, maybe you can't press against the wall, but if you can put your hands on the desk, or maybe even your elbows into the arms of the chair you're sitting in, if you have arms on your chair, that can be grounding as well. But again, it brings you to the present moment. And we also, for you who want to try it, we have Trauma Resource Institute produced this app. It's called iChill app, and you can find it on the App Store, or you can go to ichillapp.com on your browser, on your laptop or desktop, and utilize this app to help you get back into your resilient zone. As you can see, there's a button that says skills, and it'll take you through all the skills that we talked about today, and then others that are in the model. And there's also a grounding exercise. So if you're not really sure about grounding, the writer of this model, Elaine Miller-Karras, talks us through a beautiful grounding exercise that you can listen to and learn how to do from this app. Or again, you can visit it on your web browser. There's also resiliency images, things that can generally bring a sense of well-being just from the image on that app too. So again, that's just something else that you can access and use. And there's tons of research around this model. Has moved from research informed to evidence-based model, or nurses have used these skills. And there was a paper published from Emory University of nurse well-being after learning these skills. With a large effect size, nurses reported that they had a stronger sense of well-being and being able to manage stress in their work life. So that's really, really crucial. Other research done has been published in the International Journal of Mental Health too. So just to kind of give you an idea of how widespread CRIM is, it's all over the world. You can find the Trauma Resource Institute on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and really share what you've learned with others through that. So again, I'm so grateful for the time. We are right up at 1 o'clock. If you all have any questions of me, feel free to email me. I can share my information, or Anne can share my information, but I don't mind answering any questions anybody may have right now either. But thank you all for your time. I really am grateful for the space. And Amy had to head out, but she also says thank you for allowing us to do this presentation.
I'd like to thank Javene and Amy, give them a round of applause. And thank you, it was a wonderful presentation. I've actually looked at the iChill app on my phone, I really like it. So I would give a plug for that. I've put in the chat box some resources for you. So if any of you are interested in training further in CRIM or learning more about it, there are free trainings on the website. The Resilience Task Force website, so I'll put that there. And if any of you missed the Resilience movie, the documentary, Public Schools First NC are providing some free public screenings, so you can go there for that too. But thank you, Javene, and thank you, Amy, even though you've gone, for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you.